Also, I am the Topish Sustainable Forest Collaborative Co-Coordinator. So I wear a lot of different hats in this landscape, and I'm really passionate about working with landowners and private property, and also our forests and resources. So that's kind of why I'm here today. I'm going to turn it over to Phil Hess, the chapter president, and he can go over what he's got to.
Good morning. Well, it's great to see everybody. We all, we didn't have any meetings last year, and so this is the first meeting we've had since the fall of 2019, and it's great to see everybody. Just to remind all of you that we are the Kittitas chapter of the Washington Farm Forestry Association. I'm the president. Patty O'Hearn, thank goodness, is the secretary treasurer and the workhorse for the chapter. She is doing everything now because she's better at it than I am. and Rose is too. But anyway, our chapter membership is hovering right around 70. That represents about 200 individuals and about 6,000 acres. So, and I'll talk about our new members when we have our chapter meeting at starting at 12:40. But anyway, we have one new member that's added about 1,000 acres to our chapter membership, and nearly all of this is in Kittitas County, actually Upper Kittitas County. So that's a pretty good representation of the family forest owners in Kittitas County. 200 individuals and about 6,000 acres. And we are open to new members. And you don't have to be a forest landowner to join. You can go to the WFFA website and see a button there that says how to join. Anyway, our collective goal between us and KFACC is to assure that we pass on a green forested landscape to the next generation versus green or black. And that's kind of why we're here today and into the near future. And that's why our association with KFACC is so important. We're really joined at the hip there. And one of the other things that's important to realize when we're talking to some of our constituents is that forest health and firewise terminology should be used in the same sentence. They're so interconnected that you can't really separate them. And I like to use the term forest health and fire resiliency best practices. Now that's over the head of most of our constituents, so we use firewise as a terminology instead. But I think it's really important that when we're talking to people that we link those two terms together and emphasize how they are so closely interconnected. So we've got a really good program today, and I want to extend my acknowledgement and thank you to Rose and Patty for setting this up, and look forward to hearing from all of you. Thanks, Rose.
You're welcome. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Patty, again. Also, I just want to express my appreciation for everyone in our little bit of a technology hiccup, but that's okay. Seems like it probably won't be the first, and it probably won't be the last. So thank you for bearing with us. With that, I'd love to turn it over to Amy Ramsey from the Washington DNR. She's with the Forest Health Division, and she's going to talk about forest health in particular to our area. So Amy, thank you. And thanks for being here on a Saturday.
Okay, yeah, thanks everyone. As Rose mentioned, I'm Amy Ramsey with the Washington Department of Natural Resources, and I'm an environmental planner with the Forest Health and Resiliency Division. I used to be based in Olympia, which is where my career started. I've been with the agency for about 15 years now, and for the first 12 or 13 of those years, I was a forest pathologist. And so I traveled the state and looked at different trees and tried to diagnose why they were dying. I helped Phil several years ago at Kittitas look at some needle cast, which I'll show you a picture of in a few minutes. And then I've helped the Forest Service up at some of the campgrounds up near Salmon-Lasac to do some hazard tree assessment work. I recently, during the time of COVID, have relocated from Olympia to Roslyn so that I can be in the landscape in which I work, and also that I'm really advocating forest health and wildfire resiliency best practices for. And so I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited for this opportunity. Next is my opportunity to show you my lack of tech savviness. So I have a presentation with some slides, and we'll get them loaded in just a second somehow. Okay, so Rose, I have my presentation opened, but I have to do a share screen, is that right?
Yes, so click share screen, and then it should give you the option to share your presentation. So look for the title of that PowerPoint.
Okay. Let's see, share, here we go. Okay, everyone can see that? Thumbs up. I really appreciate in the little comments thing you can do, there's like a thumbs up and a party hat and a smiley, and there's no like thumbs down or boo one. So we're staying positive in this space. So I already mentioned these things. I'm also a coordinator for the 20-year Forest Health Strategic Plan for Eastern Washington. So I'm pretty intimate with that collaborative effort that's happening across our really landscapes in Eastern Washington. There's my email address. I will also have it on the ending slide. And so if you have any questions about anything that I present, by all means, just get in touch. And if I don't know the answer, I'm sure I can figure out who does. So this picture in the background really captures forest health and some of the issues that we have in Eastern Washington. You know, this is a mix of Douglas fir and ponderosa pine and probably some lodgepole pine in there. And you can see the trees that are yellow and red are recently dead, and the trees that are gray are been dead for a few years. And so this is just illustrating some of the impacts that really our native disturbance agents can have, specifically bark beetles and little tiny insects. Okay, I'm gonna try to get it to go to the next slide. We'll see. Perfect. Okay. So Phil mentioned forest health, and you know, forest health, it encompasses so much, really a lot of the work that we do in the places that we live. And so it's been hard, especially over my career, to have this solid, consistent definition. And I'm going to read this to you. It's from our 2020 Forest Action Plan, and it pretty much encompasses, again, a lot of different things. Forest health is the condition of a forest ecosystem, and it reflects its ability to sustain characteristic structure. So, you know, the different trees and snags, function and processes. And so that's where that hydrologic cycle image is at the top, something that's really important that we need. These healthy forests have resilience to fire, insects, and other disturbance mechanisms. And they have the ability to adapt to changing climate and increased drought stress, which is a big issue right now. And also, one of the most important components is the capacity to provide those ecosystem services that meet the landowner objectives and human needs. And so, you know, there's a handful of folks on the call, and I haven't met most of you. I've met some of you. And I imagine that you all have similar, but also a little different objectives for your property that you work in or manage or care about. And so that's a really key component when you're looking at, is your forest healthy, and is it doing what it's supposed to do? And so down here, I put this picture of a tree that fell onto a car in a camper in a campground. because I mentioned doing some work with the Forest Service, but also Washington State Parks. And so one of their objectives is going to be, we want the forest that the people are camping in to be safe. And so one of their priorities is going to be to make sure if there's dead or dying trees to get them out of that public space. So the title of the talk is What's Going On in Forest Health Across the State and What's Going On at the Local Level. And again, that encompasses a lot. And so we have several different ways that we can monitor how the forests are doing across the state. And the area where I used to spend most of my time was in the truck and in the boots. And so really on the ground with the landowners at the site level. Another thing that I was engaged in is sort of a mid-scale, and that's flying over the whole state and mapping dead and dying trees that we see from a small fixed wing airplane. So a couple thousand feet above the ground, we can see the discoloration of the trees. And we've been able to, through some training on the ground and in the air, identify the color of the trees based on the species and what they usually die from. And so we map those and then we create some fancy maps. This map I have here is from 2019 in Eastern Washington, and there's a bunch of different colored polygons on there showing where we mapped tree mortality or defoliation. But because of COVID, similar to you all not having a meeting since fall 2019, we haven't done an aerial survey in 2020. And so we don't have those conditions mapped out for last summer to be able to continue showing trends. So we have this local on the ground scale, we have this from the airplane scale, and then we get fancy. We have this landscape level like analysis and modeling and stuff in the computer and old photos. And so this is another tool that we have added really collectively to our toolbox to be able to look at how are the forest health conditions changing over time, where do we expect them to go in the future, and where have we come from so we can have maybe some lessons learned from the past. So these are photos from 1934, and then 2010 is on the bottom. And that really shows the story that we're all living amongst, right? We have a history of fire suppression, you know, hit it fast and hit it hard and hit it heavy. But then that really eliminated some of our naturally occurring fires that would move through the landscape and keep these spaces where we might have gaps or just less trees and less biomass on the landscape that now really is serving as fuels for those wildfires. And then, so some of the work we're able to, there's a little diagram that says reference conditions and management targets. We have some really smart scientists working at DNR right now, and then partners. You can see Paul Hesberg with US Forest Service is credited for the photos for letting us use them. And they're able to do these analysis with these photo interpretations and look and see what are our target levels for our restoration activities in our forests. And so that really gives us something that we can monitor over time to see, are we achieving any restoration targets? What targets do we have and what actions do we need to do on the ground to get more of that resiliency into our forested landscapes? So like Phil mentioned, we can leave a legacy of green trees and not a black denuded landscape. So the DNR has worked with partners over many years to develop some strategic plans. And here's a 2020 action plan to help summarize where we are and develop a framework for how we can work with partners across natural resource boundaries and achieve some of the goals that are needed on our landscape, because it is complicated. One is this 20-year forest health strategic plan for Eastern Washington. One is this forest health highlights in Washington, and one is a forest action plan. And another thing that I wanted to mention about these documents is they also summarize like forest health conditions at the different scales across our state. And so What I'm going to do right now is our most recent document, this Forest Action Plan, really went through issues across the state and highlighted what we're dealing with collectively as a population. And so I'm going to walk through those first, and then I'll get to some of the more specifics on the local level. Climate change. Surprise. And so really this is looking at something that we're all really aware of. Our climatic conditions are driving what we see on the ground. So they're gonna guide what species we have of trees and understory and wildlife. They're gonna guide how much water we have in our rivers and our lakes. They're gonna guide how healthy our trees are doing. And then as we get these fluctuations that we've all been observing, heavier rain events, bigger wind events, less rain throughout the summer, things drying out more quickly, then that impacts how our forests are growing, really, and functioning. And so some of the, I would say, direct impacts related from some of the things we're going to see with climate change now and moving forward are, and you all know these, but it's just sort of like, everybody's noticing increased wildfire potential across the state. So Western and Eastern Washington, increased damage from insects and diseases. So this goes back to we have more trees on the landscape than the landscape's really able to support with the amount of water that we're getting that's falling from the sky through snow or rain. And so they're all competing, they're all a little stressed. And so that makes them more vulnerable and not able to fight off as quickly these insects and diseases that a lot of them are already naturally found in the landscape. Potential seed and reforestation challenges. So I remember being out in the field following 2015, right? Like that big highlight drought year. So many seedling regeneration failures. They were planted whenever we normally plant, fall or spring, depending on which landowner you are. And just a lot of them didn't survive. They just didn't get enough water when their root systems were so small. And then you look at seed issues. So trees are similar to any other type of plant. They need that energy that comes from water and sugars to be able to produce the seed. If they're living on the fringe and barely getting enough of what they need, they're not necessarily going to have enough energy to produce those seed that we can collect and then grow into seedlings and plant. Potential increases in conditions that trigger landslides and debris flows, potential changes in forest productivity, potential forest road damage, and then impacts to at-risk species. I'm glad we don't have the thumbs down button, because that's what I would be like, no thank you. Okay, so one of the biggest things that I've been experiencing in my career and how to respond to from a forest health perspective, and all of you have been doing the same, are droughts, are increasing intensity and severity of the droughts we're having. And so droughts are when average temperatures increase and average precipitation, either again through snow or rainfall, decreases. And then what it does is it creates stress within the trees, and it can stunt its growth. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, make it more susceptible to insects and diseases. Whenever we have events, we've had several years of pretty significant droughts, then our trees can maintain for a little bit, but then they get to the point where they just either dry up or they're not able to make enough sugar to keep them going. And so we have seen a level of mortality associated with those droughts in our trees and forests. So, but other impacts can be severe wildfire seasons, low stream flows, and widespread fish mortality. We saw this after the 2015 summer drought. Species composition changes. So maybe you have your high elevation hike that you've loved going to, and you have some white bark pine up there, a really special species in our state that, it doesn't grow in a lot of places. But these droughts stress that tree that's already at the top of the mountain, and sometimes it can push those species completely off the mountain so they don't grow there anymore, and then reduce forest productivity. So another big forest health issue across the entire state are insects and disease outbreaks. So some of these are normal, some of these you might see a little bark beetle outbreak on the hillside, or you might see a little patch of root disease killed trees. A lot of you probably are really familiar with, I guess it's like Douglas fir tussock moth that was up in the SWAC recently. So some of these, we have this trend data from the aerial survey to see how much of that mortality can we really expect, and then what is considered an outbreak. And so as trees become more stressed, this is sort of the sentence I'm going to keep saying, due to limited water and warming temperatures, then they're going to be more susceptible to these insects and diseases. This picture in the middle that's a little bit bigger, that shows some red, that's where defoliation is happening. And what can happen with that is the tree can become defoliated, and then there might be a drought, and then that can cause the whole tree to die because it's under so much stress. Wildfire. I feel like I can't do this topic justice because I'm coming from the tree health perspective, and it would be really good. We have some people that'll talk a little bit more about some different components of fire in our ecosystems in a little bit, but the risk and costs associated with wildfire are increasing. And you can see, if you look at the map, you can see that we're in a really high, very high risk area. And it's something we all know. And as we have these longer and drier summers, then we're going to be at risk for really increased wildfires through a longer period of time. I wanted to make sure to mention something about Western Washington wildfires too. This is an issue that is coming up more and more, and I mean, especially obviously last year's fires down in Western Oregon really brought this to the conversation forefront. And so we had in Washington these ecosystems that did burn frequently historically, and still do, with active folks continuing their practices. So in those oak and prairie habitats. But then we had these coastal rainforests that they didn't grow. I mean, they didn't burn that often. I have a note here that says once a millennia. I've heard some other that, maybe every 500 years. But that doesn't mean that fires aren't happening. We have over in Western Washington, lots and lots of small fire starts due to people, more I believe than over in Eastern Washington. And as, again, things are drying out faster, there's more people on the landscape, there's more fire starts, then we're trying to get a better understanding of how all of those are going to interact with each other and impact the landscape in Western Washington in relation to fire. Invasive species. I had to go take my daughter to meet her dad in Maple Valley yesterday. And fortunately over here, there's not, like, Scotch broom isn't, I'm sure it's a problem, but I don't see it as prevalently as I do in Western Washington. So as soon as I got over the pass, the bright yellow everywhere, and then the blackberry. But we also have insects that we're really constantly, mostly through the Department of Agriculture, on the lookout for any new introductions of invasive species. But then we have some in our landscape that we will just always be dealing with. But obviously the significance of those is our trees and shrub species. They don't have natural defenses that they've developed against them. Or if you have these issues like ivy or Scotch broom or blackberry, then basically they just cover the landscape where natives aren't able to grow up through and establish themselves. I wanted to put this map in here. This is about white pine blister rust, and it's a species that I've worked on a lot in my career. It's an introduced disease, non-native, that was introduced in the early 1900s, and it has severely impacted a lot of our 5-needle pines, which in our landscapes are going to be western white pine and white bark pine. And I just want to show that in the map where this wave of basically movement that this white pine blister rust did across the west. This isn't a current map, but it's just an illustration showing how quickly it moved and reduced the populations of some of our native pine species. All right, conversion and loss to forest lands. That's a big one. And it's something that I'm not really solid on the statistics around here, but I know that it's something that comes up in conversations pretty frequently. And so this data that I've reported on the slide, I wanted to make sure to give some numbers, but it's old, right? Like conversion occurring on more than 1% of forest land annually. That data is from 2007. Like, what does it look like now? Is that percentage increasing based on the amount of development that's happening per year? I see some nods, and so it'd be interesting to see. I mean, do we really need a number though? Like, we see what's happening. And so, you know, this is in Western Washington, there's been a loss of more than 80% of the old growth due to development. And then this fragmentation of the landscape, you know, it impacts us, it increases wildfire risk, it impacts our wildlife, it impacts our water. So it's something that through some planning and policy at the state level and probably local levels with urban growth boundaries, then we're trying to get a handle on the issue, but it feels like a tidal wave that it's hard to get ahead of, that's for sure. Okay, so we're going to shift over to our local landscape, but I wanted to transition with this map. And so again, the data is a little bit older, it's a few years old, but basically what it is through some risk analyses and through some of that aerial survey, dead tree mapping stuff, these maps were put together and they're really showing how much mortality has happened over the past 15 years. And so you can see really in that central eastern Cascades area and then up in northeast, there's quite a bit of mortality. In some places, definitely more than 50 dead trees per acre. Local overstock forests. So the message that we have been hearing and we're pretty well aware of being in this landscape. The top map shows the expected. The red shows areas where there's expected to be greater than 25% of the basal area lost on the landscape due to insect and disease risk. It doesn't even incorporate large-scale wildfires. And so that's quite a bit of mortality that's expected that we may have not, you know, we might have observed at this point, maybe not. But for those of you who are new to the conversation, down below are a series of photos that shows forest progression from early 1900s to current conditions. And these are a series of photo points in the same area of forest. And it really shows the impacts of forest management, some forest management practices, and then fire suppression. And so when we had fire rolling through the landscape on a pretty frequent basis, then it'd be more, some of these stands might look a little bit more park-like and open. But as we started suppressing fires, then we just had a lot of understory species and shrubs coming in, and we really lost that park-like structure. Climate change and drought, I definitely talked a lot about this in a few previous slides, so I'm not really going to go through it too much. The photos are in the top right are ponderosa pine stand with root disease. The lower right is showing just a seedling and some of our challenges associated with regeneration that we may have to keep in mind if as we're watching weather patterns. We might shift to, if we usually do spring planting, we might do fall planting instead if it's possible. When we have big droughts, we might expect, or we should expect, seedlings and saplings to see mortality in those. There's just not enough water for them. And so that's that upper left photo. And the lower left photo is some bark beetle damage from the ground. And so you can see it's a clustered mortality effect. The red crowns are the dead trees. Bark beetles. So there's several species of bark beetles that we have around here. And, you know, right now I'm looking out my window at Roslyn Ridge, and I can see the western pine beetle in the ponderosa pine. And so that's something that's a beetle that's going to attack larger, older pine trees. But we also have a mountain pine beetle that's going to impact smaller diameter pine trees. And the picture on the top left shows some pitch tubes. And so I have I did a little forest health lesson with my daughter and her friend the other day. They wanted to excavate out and start using an old tree house that was in a dead ponderosa pine that had pitch tubes coming out of it. And I was like, I don't really think that's the best idea, because these beetles bring in fungi that then start causing decay of the tree, and then the trees fall over and go back, you know, they go back to the earth. So I was like, I don't really want you climbing around on this dead tree that's kind of tall. And then so some of these since we have multiple bark beetles in our forest, they often affect different species of trees and different sizes of trees. You can figure out what type of beetle you're dealing with based on the host, but also the gallery shape. And so I just put an example of a Douglas fir bark beetle gallery, and that's that sort of squiggly J shape gallery with the larvae that are actually coming out. Needle cast, I mentioned going out with Phil on Suncadia property several years ago, and there was a ton of needle cast, wasn't there, Phil? A lot. And so we walked around and we looked, and what I recall, and that was a while ago, so my memory might not be perfect, but we had a cool, wet spring, and so that really favored the fungus in the older needles of the Douglas of the pine. And so these needle casts are caused by fungi. And so definitely these changes in weather pattern, or just how the weather is each year, can impact, do we see needle casts on our trees or not? So the cool, wet spring, we saw some increases in needle casts. And then sometimes though, if we have a warm, dry spring, areas like coastal Washington that usually deal with needle casts might not have as much anymore. And then the lower photo is a picture of a Douglas fir, and that's another needle cast. And it happens whenever the seed stock doesn't match the region in which it's planted. And so it's always stressed based on, it's not adapted to the growing conditions based on the moisture available, or the temperature fluctuations, or the humidity. And this is something that locally we're all working on, we're all tracking, we're all trying to figure out how to work together to deal with. So how climate change is going to affect wildfire management in Washington State. There's you know, literature out about that, but basically it's a collective effort that we have to try to proactively and reactively respond to. I'm getting close to the end, so that's good of our summary. This is what I wanted to show, though, our forest land ownership in Western Washington and Eastern Washington. And so the previous slide, I said we have to collectively work together on these issues, because they don't stop at ownership boundaries. And this is really showing how complex the land ownership mixes can be in across the state and within each maybe geography or landscape in which we live and work. This is a really busy slide, but it's focusing in on the area we're in now. And so I mentioned I'm the coordinator for the 20-year Forest Health Strategic Plan in Eastern Washington, and that's an effort to bring our forests into a more resilient state now and for the future. And so through that plan, there's several, they're mapped in the green colors, priority planning areas across Eastern Washington. And that's area where Partners are focusing really on the collaborative efforts and planning and implementation that it's going to take to get some of the restoration activities done across the landscape. The upper left shows the different colors of wildfire and forest health risk in the area where we live. And so there's Cle Elum and Teanaway. It's hard to point them out where I am, but they're there. And then another tool that is being developed is these implementation plans. And so that's tracking what are our restoration goals from that high level monitoring that's happening on landscape conditions. What activities do we need to do to restore our landscapes? And then we have maps and actions that different people are doing and actions that different people want to do and maybe need resources for. And really, I love this photo or this document, I guess, because it's really highlights in a really friendly way all the different things that people are working on to try to get our landscapes to be more resilient to just these forest health risks. And I just love it because it's recreation, defensible space, rural economic development, like all the factors that go into what it takes to mean to create a resilient landscape in a particular place. That was our whirlwind around and across Washington. I do want you all to know that if we ever want to take a deep dive into any of these concepts or ideas, or maybe specific biology or ecology around some of the different disturbance agents in our area, like I would be totally happy to help make that happen. So that's all I have. I don't know, Rose, if there's time for questions now or there'll be time for questions later, but I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was, I really enjoyed the really local aspect that you took and also that high level overview. So we're running a little bit behind. So if you do have questions, feel free to use the chat. Hopefully Amy will be sticking around, but I'll have Amy put in her contact information in the chat. And so you can reach out to her directly if you choose. And then after the meeting, I'll follow up with some resource lists that are mentioned in the chat. So next we have Kara Karbowski from Washington Prescribed Fire Council, and she's been working on the Cascadia TREX up in the Roslyn Ridge for since 2017. So go ahead, Kara.
Thanks, Rose, and thanks everyone for inviting me and hosting me today. My name is Kara Karbowski. I'm the coordinator, as Rose said, for the Washington Prescribed Fire Council. And I actually think, was it 2 or 3 years ago? I actually spoke at one of the WFFA Kittitas chapter meetings. And so it's great to be back. I'm really excited about just the work that's happening in Kittitas County. And I think there's just like a lot of opportunity. And so I'm just really, really happy to be here today to talk about the work that we've been doing. Let's see if I can make this work. Oh man, this is hard when you're only have one screen. Unfortunately, I'm kind of remote today. Let me see if I can make this work. We'll try.
You can do it, Kara. I
know, right? I can do it. Okay.
You can do it.
Let's see. Did that work? Awesome. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing in the Washington Prescribed Fire Council, supporting prescribed burning that's been happening around Roslyn on private lands and bigger plans to do burning in Roslyn urban forests and up onto the Central Cascade Forest managed by the Nature Conservancy. So as Rose said, we've been working there since 2017 as part of the Cascadia Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, or TREX program. And that's really about creating training opportunities, for firefighters and other fire practitioners, just trying to increase our capacity to be able to utilize fire. So I'll give a little background about the council and then talk a little bit about the work that we're moving forward. So the council, we're a coalition of prescribed fire stakeholders, practitioners, land managers, scientists, anyone really can join who's interested in prescribed fire and wants to kind of support that. We've been around, formed in 2011, 2012, and I've been a part of the council since I think like 2013, 2014. So, and really the whole intention of the council is to be this coalition who can work on prescribed fire statewide, try to remove the barriers that are in the way of being able to use this as a tool. I think it was really great to have Amy really teed that up really well as far as setting the context and trying to think about how we reintroduce fire back to the landscape where it's needed. It's one of the tools in the toolbox. It's not the only thing that we need, but it's one of the things that really you can't really replicate it any other way. It just having fire, that's part of the natural cycle of some of these forests. And so how do we bring that back? So that's what we're trying to do. You know, our mission here, you know, we're trying to protect, conserve, and expand the safe and responsible use of prescribed fire in Washington. And that's really on all lands. We're not, definitely we work a lot with our federal and state partners because they're the ones doing the most burning. But the council, you know, we are all really interested and want to bring fire back to the people. How do we bring it back to as a tool for private landowners? It's a little bit of a black box of how to use it as part of our toolbox of forest management. So just like a little bit of history, and Amy had that same photo. I won't go into background of forest health. Amy did a great job of that. I just more wanted to bring up this context of, you know, yes, we excluded fire from the landscape, but we also removed fire from our cultures, and clearly from Native American, indigenous cultures, we've restricted their use of fire. They were traditionally used fire for land management for all sorts of reasons, for reasons, for food. But also even settlers coming from Europe and other places, fire was a big component of land management. And with, you know, the burns of 1910, you know, the West in general has this mindset of fire suppression. And it's really impacted, I think, our understanding of fire in the landscape, everyone's, you know, the public's understanding of fire in the landscape, how comfortable we are with fire, and really understanding how it's used and how it's needed, as well as like the technical skills, like private, you know, small forest landowners used to burn a lot more. 80s and 90s in Washington, that was more of a tool that was used. And in the last 20, 30 years, it's just for various reasons, it hasn't been used. In the southeast of the United States, fire is it's still huge. Florida burns on purpose like 1 million to 2 million acres a year, which is a crazy amount on purpose, intentionally burning things, which our numbers when we hear them during wildfire seasons are really scary. They're doing it on purpose. And they've just maintained that use of it. Landowners down there, it's how you take care of your land, how you take care of your property. They have more frequent fire regimes, to be clear. You know, they have to burn every like 2 to 3 years, just based on the forest types in the South. But they've retained that knowledge and retained that skill. And so, you know, that's kind of something that we're trying to do. We're trying to build, you know, the social license, the understanding of why we're using fire, and then start to figure out how do we bring fire back? How do we make this part of our community's toolbox? And in general, there is a lot of interest that is growing in the West in general. These are some photos that I borrowed from the California Prescribed Burn Association website. There's a link down there. Burn associations are basically cooperatives of landowners who come together to burn property, understanding they're not professional firefighters. They're just landowners. They come together, they share resources and equipment and their time, and they come out and burn property together. And so you can kind of see these folks here. They're not wearing, they're wearing some yellows, but they're not wearing, you know, Nomex traditional firearms. They're landowners, and they're coming out and burning and doing it together. You can find more information about these types of things. California, they had one PBA, and it's really grown. It's exploded. I don't know how many they have in Northern California, but there's one now in Southwest Oregon as well. So just there's a general interest in how do we bring fire back to the private landowner, the small forest landowner, the family forester, and really trying to, like I said, open up the black box. Where do you start? What does this look like? How do we do it? So one of the ways that the council has been moving forward on this is through the prescribed fire training exchange or Cascadia TREX. And through that kind of capacity and bringing, firefighters in, we've been doing, conducting burns on private lands adjacent to the city of Roslyn. And this last fall, we did another additional burn, for 22 acres. And this was actually cross boundaries. So half of it was on private land, and the other half was on in the city of Roslyn on the Roslyn urban forest. And I think a big key component of this too is where before we've had these TREX crews, which are made up of, professionals and other folks from, all over the country sometimes. This burn this last fall was really planned, prepped, and put on by local fire districts. We had 5 local fire districts from Kittitas County, as well as some from outside the county. And it was just, the fire department, the people that are there are part of the community. So it really was a community-led burn. It was really, really great to see. Overall, since 2017, we've burned 100 acres on the private property. Excuse me, that's just adjacent to the city of Roslyn, the Roslyn urban forest. And the plan is eventually to come all the way down. There's a burn plan for the Roslyn urban forest. The plan is to go all the way down to the urban forest, all the way up to the top of the ridge onto Central Cascade Forest managed land. And this has really been, it's been a lot of work, but we're starting to build that interest and engagement and seeing people really wanting to do more of this, which is really, really exciting. And I think I have, a photo from, so this is after our burn this fall. You can see, this is, treatment has already happened in this area. You can see some of these trees are limbed up. And, we came in with some fire and we burned some of the fuels on the ground, right? That's really what it's about, is maintaining our overstory of the trees that we want, large diameter trees, and trying to reduce the fuels on the ground, reduce fire risk, return those nutrients back to the soil. And this is the first introduction of this fire since who knows when the last fire was here. I think this photo is actually taken from we actually burned the area that the person is standing in was burned, I believe, in 2019, fall of 2019, just to give you a little context for what's happening there. So yeah, so this is what we're trying to do. This is like what it looks like afterwards, a little smoldering. I think our intention and our desire is to be doing more of this in Kittitas County, working with private landowners and doing more of this. Let's get more fire on the ground. And so I think this work in Roslyn, which has been critical. We can't, the council can't do this work alone. We're here to support, but it's really been this work here is because of the work of the fire districts and other people who are really interested and engaged and help support and move this forward. This has also driven our idea of like, well, how do we bring back this idea of community fire management or just community fire, cooperative fire? And part of that is we kind of have this vision of, building local capacity and partnerships to work with, all across all lands. So, we have, Andy from WCU Extension, we've got folks from DNR. How do we start bringing, prescribed fire to the folks that you guys are already working with, who have cost shares and other things? And how do we bring in, our federal, tribal partners, et cetera, to build, all this capacity to support, doing the burn plans and the prep and all that's needed for this. Definitely start working with more small forest landowners. This is really about, this was kind of a demonstration, proof of concept. We need to keep doing more of those demonstrations and proof of concept to show like, this is the pathway, here's how it's done. Part of that is identifying the challenges, and then we work to figure out how to address those challenges. That's kind of what the council does. Building that local workforce, potentially, city Roslyn Fire Department has a fuels crew. I think they're coming back again this spring. And that's just really about building that local workforce, but it doesn't have to be fuels crews. It can be, a prescribed burn association. It could be all sorts of things. So looking at different ideas of how that might work. And then, working with the community and advocacy groups, really trying to build that social license and understanding about why we need to do this. And I think a lot of that's happening. I think a lot of people do understand, but also addressing and making sure we're communicating well about smoke. Because that's a very real impact from people from doing prescribed burn smoke. People are susceptible. And so how do we have those conversations and just address that? And so we have this vision based on the work we've done in Roslyn and through Cascadia TREX, and where we want to implement this, continue to implement this plan here in Kittitas County and Roslyn, and not just Roslyn, Cleveland, Upper Kittitas County, and then the rest of the state, really. So right now, actually, we are in Northeast Washington. Well, not right now, but essentially we're doing work. We're doing a TREX in Northeast Washington right now. Due to COVID, our model is a little different than we've normally done, but part of this is moving forward to engage the local community in fire. We're working with the local fire departments in Stevens and Ponderay and Berry counties. These are a lot of what we're doing right now is training burn opportunities. So the fire departments are coming out, getting training with our federal, state, and tribal partners. We're supporting their work because they need support to be able to pull their burns off. But it's also what we were hoping to do is actually have a burn on a small forest landowner property this spring, but we didn't quite have all our balls in the right place. But what we are doing is we're starting visits. We have a couple of connections. Those folks are definitely part of their chapter of the Washington Farm Forestry Association in Stevens County. We're going to have site visits with them, talk with them. They're really interested and engaged. I think one of them is already ready. The unit is prepped. They're just waiting for the right time and developing those burn plans. So we're starting to have those conversations. And it's not like forever the council is going to be able to write burn plans for people, but we need that push, right, to move forward, get some demonstrations of how this might work and what this looks like. And so we're hoping this spring we're going to have some burn plans written on private property, family foresters, and potentially this coming fall or next spring, we would support them to get some burning done. And you can stay up to date. There's a link. I can put the link into the chat after this of where we're burning on state, federal, tribal land right now in Northeast Washington. There'll be some burning next week. Fingers crossed. The weather is good with the Park Service up near Kettle Falls. And so this is just, again, we're moving this forward. We want to be engaging more with private landowners, engaging with local fire departments, engaging with the community the best that we can. So I guess, overall, just to kind of wrap all of that up, clearly Cascadia TREX again this fall, there might be some opportunities to engage in that. And I think for the council, we're looking for people who are interested and ready to kind of have more of a conversation about this. Are you interested in prescribed fire on your property? How can we help you? What are your questions? Reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about this. Reach out to Chris Martin, who's our chair, and also with Roslyn Fire Department, and really the one spearheading the burning on the Roslyn Urban Forest. He's gone through this whole process. He's a great contact to have those one-on-one conversations about what this actually looks like and what it takes, but the benefits as well. So yeah, I guess I'll stop right there, Rose. I don't know if we've got time for questions or not, but either way, you can also send me questions or give me a call or shoot me an email.
That's great, Kara. I think we have time for one or two questions if people want to enter them in the chat or unmute themselves.
Yeah, Kara, this is great. I think what we need to address, at least locally in Kittitas County, is how to get the burn plan done. I have a client, for example, in Swauk Prairie area that we've done the mechanical treatment. We're ready to do prescribed fire, and we're having it seems like we're having difficulty finding somebody to do a burn plan. You got any ideas?
Yeah, part of the challenge, Phil, is just because there hasn't been a lot of work on private lands, there's not the contracting capacity to support those things. And so that's kind of one thing we're trying to address. We're trying to make those connections where we can. It's sort of like a chicken and egg situation. The contractors come when there's the demand for for what they do, but the people also need that now to be able to reach out. So it's a challenge. I can put you in connection. I know you've reached out before, Phil, and if those folks that we tried to connect you with didn't work out, we've probably got some other folks we could make some connection. it's definitely one of the challenges that we're hoping by the council kind of trying to move forward with this, that we can build more interest and there'll be more contracting capacity and interest. So.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about it. Give me a call or I'll
Yeah,
call
okay. That sounds good.
you.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Kara. One more question, or I can move along. Okay. Well, you have the chat function, so feel free to utilize that and ask your questions, and we can certainly follow up with your questions. I have participated in the Cascadia TREX. It's been valuable experience for local fire departments, so I really appreciate your work in our landscape, Kara, and the building capacity component. With fire adapted communities, there are a lot of strategies that we use to move landscapes and communities towards a more resilient community and forest. One of the things that we've been working on is cross-boundary fuels treatment. So working with public, state, private folks to increase pace and scale along the landscape. So usually it's pre-commercial thinning. A big part of this is meeting the community where they are at. So recognizing the needs of that individual neighborhood community, whatever scale they're coming at. And because of some of the WFFA membership, especially Patty O'Hearn and involvement in some of the areas like South Clam Ridge, we were able to connect Jason Emsley, Kyle Smith from the TNC, the Nature Conservancy, and Patty and the surrounding community. So we're going to talk about that story next with Jason Emsley, who coordinated that fuels treatment project and also with the private landowners and the Nature Conservancy and Kyle Smith. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jason.
All right. Hey, everybody. Let me share my screen here. All right. Well, I'm Jason Emsley. I work for the Washington Department of Natural Resources. Currently, Landowner Assistance Program. I'll actually be transitioning as of Monday to state lands. And so I will be the district manager for forest operations for Southeast region. So I'll be handling all the stuff that Joe Smith currently handles, working with the state lands, forest restoration activities and forest operations. So that being said, a little bit about our program. A lot of you have worked with me before or know me, the Landowner Assistance Program. My forester, Rachel Mickey, will be taking over for this area. So moving forward, you can reach out to her. And so our program in landowner assistance with the DNR provides advice to landowners about managing their forest land. A lot of it surrounds fire mitigation and forest health, but also wildlife management, stewardship, whatever your objectives are. And so you can request free site visits, and we do have cost share grants. So we can help pay for doing some of this work to reduce the number of trees and the fuels, essentially, which as Amy and Kara talked about, is vital to increasing the resilience of the landscape and improving forest health. So both of the things, wildfire and forest health, go hand in hand. So as has been alluded to before, why do we do projects across boundaries? Well, insects, disease, and wildfire don't respect property lines, unfortunately, and there are many more trees on the landscape than there were historically. So due to past fire suppression activities and the increase in host species and essentially, fuel for fires, food for these different insects and pathogens, we have increased prevalence of these disturbance agents on the landscape. And then when we do have fires in certain areas, there's more fuel. And so we don't have the historical fire effects that we have seen. So This picture on the right is actually from a project I was working on up in the Okanagan. If anybody knows where Concanoli is, this is just south of there along the Salmon Creek. This was a beautiful stand of old growth ponderosa pine that had never been managed. There weren't any roads built into it. We were looking at going in there, as you can see from the top picture, you know, these big ponderosa pines have been there for centuries, and all these Douglas fir trees had grown in due to the lack of fire. And so it was all like snowberry and Douglas fir in the understory. And then in 2015, I watched the lime belt fire of the Okanagan complex jump up over the ridge as I was building dozer line and go into my project, unfortunately. And as you can see from the bottom picture, absolutely everything was burnt. So unfortunately, we lost all those big old trees. But this is my classic example of this issue that we're having across the West, is just this ingrowth of these trees into areas that had a lot lower stocking. This area had a lot of big, widely spaced old ponderosa pine trees. And so it was unfortunate, but you know, this is the challenge we're facing. So the Buffalo Springs project, we got together a group of very active landowners. We saw a need, we saw an opportunity to do a larger treatment in an area that has a lot of stuff going on and also a high risk of catastrophic fire. And so as far as implementing these projects, we in our program look for these opportunities where we can get together with landowners to do larger treatments across borders to have more impact. And so we can occasionally come in and pay for the entire project outside of our normal cost share grant program. So we identify these priority areas in conjunction with the Kittitas Fire Adapted Communities Coalition and other partners to see, you know, where do we want to do work first? Where is there the greatest need with the funding that's available? Then we identify that funding or potential funding, make contact with the landowners, discuss what our objectives are, kind of what the specifications of the work looks like, and do a bunch of site visits, initial project design. We put this through a forest practices review, you know, and environmental assessments to make sure that we're following all the right guidelines and we're not, you know, causing damage. And so like in this project, there were some streams and wetlands and other things that I had to delineate and then make sure I didn't include in the project. We flag everything on the ground. We develop the contracts with the specifications and all the protections in there so that we don't cause resource damage or damage to the landowner's properties. And then we advertise these projects for bid so we can get the best possible price. We select the contractor and then we implement the project. So this project, I put it together like 2018, 2019. It took a little longer because we were coming up with funding. And then last spring is when we implemented the project. So this is just general area. You can see the yellow star there. That's generally where it was. It's southeast of Clay Elm, down at the base of the South Clay Elm Ridge. And here's our kind of the vision of the landscape level, right, of doing work across boundaries or in conjunction with other activities. You can see here it's a mix of private and state and federal lands. And the green polygons are treatments that have been completed, the green crosshatches, and then the red are planned treatments. And these are all a mixture of fuels reduction, non-commercial like tree thinning, and then also timber sales, which are all generally thinning. They're not clear cuts. So thinning to increase the resilience of the forest across the landscape. So when the next fire burns through the area, we don't have just catastrophic effects. We have a mixture, and we have more opportunities also for firefighters to get in there and protect these communities. One of the big challenges we have in this area, if you can see in the middle of the picture of all these tiny parcels, is the Sky Meadows community. And it's just really difficult to get in there and do a lot of work due to topography, steep slopes. It's a lot of big mature trees and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of cabins and houses and things like that. So the access is difficult for firefighters. it's on a slope, so you're going to have more intense fire behavior, and you have forest health issues in the area. And so we were trying to reinforce the health and the condition of the surrounding forested areas so that firefighters had a better opportunity to keep fire out of this community, but also just on a landscape scale with these other big landowners to help improve the general condition of the forest. One of the big partners we worked with, like Rose mentioned, was the Nature Conservancy on the Central Cascade Forest land. So just west of the Buffalo Springs area, you see a big treatment on, and that's Central Cascades Forest managed by Nature Conservancy. And so that's a treatment they did in conjunction with ours. And we connected together some fuels reduction along roads to create those fire breaks to give us opportunities in a very difficult area. There's a lot of difficult terrain, steep slopes, old narrow roads. You know, it's just a high risk area to go into while a fire is happening. So we wanted to create some defensible space essentially and opportunities for firefighters to go in there safely and stop a fire. So many of you are familiar with mastication, and this is an example of the types of machines that primarily did this work on the Buffalo Springs side of the project. It basically grinds up the material and gets it on the ground. So it doesn't eliminate the fuels, but it essentially rearranges it. And so by thinning the trees out, opening the crowns up, reducing some of the fuels in the understory, and getting that material on the ground, you turn what might be a catastrophic crown fire, high intensity with really big flame lengths, into something that stays on the ground, hopefully, that is much easier to stop and also has lower intensity impacts on the remaining trees, ideally. So if a fire burns through the area, you have more trees that survive the fire. You know, the ideal would be to put prescribed fire back on the ground and help really reduce these surface fuels. But you know, as was talked about, this is still a challenge for us to implement on private land. So it's something we're working on. And this is an imperfect solution at this point, but it's a big improvement over the current conditions. And I'll show some pictures too that show kind of the before and after and kind of what objectives we were aiming for with the treatment. So I'll say also that these landowners in the Buffalo Springs project area were really excellent to work with. So this project worked out really well, where it just came together where we had a lot of neighboring landowners that were really engaged and active and had already been doing this work, and they were willing to work with us to make this happen. And so the whole project from start to end was really great to work on for me. And a lot of times we need to really meet with landowners and explain our objectives and also modify the project to make sure they get what they want out of it. And it just was excellent working with everybody. And Rachel ended up complying the contract on the ground and managing the contractor, and it just went really, really smoothly, and it turned out really well. So here's a before, and then there's the after. So you can see how we're trying to open up the tree canopies a little bit, reduce those surface fuels, and create this defensible space along this main access road, which you can see on the left. And you can see here, like, this was done, I believe we started in winter, and this was like not long after it started. You can see stuff's already growing back like immediately. So it greened up pretty quick. And I wanted to get out there and take some pictures this spring, but I didn't get a chance. But it'll be interesting to see how, you know, the vegetation recovers. It's initially, a lot of these mastication jobs don't look that great, but things grow back pretty quick. And so here's another example. So you can see it's a pretty big difference. It was pretty dense area. So this whole area, and as many of you are familiar with, in the upper county, these north-facing slopes, this moist mixed conifer forest, where you have pretty much every species of tree and brush that you can imagine that we have in our area. There's a lot of vegetation on that landscape, and this is one of the thickest, densest areas I've worked in Eastern Washington. So it was definitely interesting climbing around out there. There's a great panorama. So as you can see, there was a lot of material to contend with. So maintaining this fuels reduction work in the future is going to be much easier now. The initial push on a lot of these projects, as you can see, is a lot. I know a lot of you landowners have done this work yourself, and you know how much work it is to pick up these sticks and cut these trees up and move them around. And so this initial push where you've got thousands of trees per acre and lots of deciduous shrubs, it's really difficult to get that first stage of the work done. So the masticator is a great efficient tool to come through and open it up and reduce those fuels, and then it's easier to maintain it moving forward. And as you can see too in these pictures, we didn't want to eliminate everything in the understory. It's unnecessary to just absolutely mow down everything. So we wanted to keep some shrubs, some mature shrubs, particularly the stuff like the Rocky Mountain maples and other more developed species that are really not incredibly flammable on their own. It's when you have that contiguous fuel setup where everything is so dense that fire can just travel through it. So we tried to leave a lot just to give it more of that natural look, to maintain cover for wildlife habitat. These treatment areas were larger since we were trying to do more of a landscape level treatment, but we also have corridors running through the area for the stream buffers and the wetlands. So there are corridors with dense cover for wildlife to move through that breaks up the sight lines as well. So it didn't open it up completely where it looks like a park or it looks unnatural. And then all the shrubs, you know, they're adapted to disturbance. So they're going to start growing back and they're going to be great forage for wildlife at that point. So you'll see a lot of wildlife just continue to use this area and actually be able to move through it better, because a lot of these areas, I can attest, were so dense you couldn't walk through it. The ocean spray out there was the densest ocean spray I've ever seen. There were areas I just couldn't make it through. I couldn't travel unless I was crawling on the ground through, you know, wildlife tunnels. And so that's generally it. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'm going to stick around as well until the end of the presentation. So if people have questions, then they can hit me up.
Great, thank you, Jason. Thank you. Do we have questions? We'll make time for one or two, and then as always, you can use the chat box. So Phil asked in the chat box if you could talk more about the cost per acre, Jason.
Yeah, so a lot of these projects, it's highly variable on what it ends up costing. I guess I could give a really wide range. You know, when you're doing these fuels reduction, it could be anywhere from under $1,000 per acre up to $2,500 or $3,000 per acre. By putting together bigger projects like this one, this project was 57 acres. You're able to get a better price essentially, because the contractors like to do big projects, and also having a competitive bid process helps us out with that. So we were at the lower end of that spectrum, around down closer to $1,000 per acre, which was really, really good, especially for this area, because this area, like I said, was at the higher end of the work level from what we see, just because of the density of the trees and the vegetation. The terrain was generally good. You could operate a machine on most of it, which helps with the cost. You know, once you get into steeper slopes, which we had a little bit of on this, a few acres here and there, you have to do it by hand a lot of times with a crew and a chipper, and you have to drag material, and it gets a lot more expensive. But that's generally, you know, if you're looking at doing this work with your neighbors, work with your landowner assistance forester, and if you can get together with your neighbors, even if we're not paying for it fully, if you're doing a cost share grant, the more work you can bundle together will help attract more contractors. It'll be more competitive and they'll be more interested in doing the work. So you can save money from that respect.
If this were a cost share project, how much would the landowner be out of pocket, Jason, roughly, for the range?
Yeah, it's hard to give an exact number, but due to the thickness of the vegetation here, our cost share grant would probably cover, you know, $850 to $950 per acre. That would be our cost share grants are 50% of the cost up to that maximum. So that maximum per acre would be $850 to $950 just due to the density of the forest. And then, yeah, honestly, from just what I've seen, if a small landowner hired a contractor to do a couple acres of how dense this was, it'd probably be $2,000 or $2,500 an acre. So you can see how our cost share wouldn't even necessarily meet that 50%, but by bundling all this together, it helped bring our price down quite a bit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Do we have another question?
Yeah.
Brian, do you have a question?
I have a question. Jason, what happens next? Brian and I were both part of this Buffalo Springs project. There is a lot of slash on the ground. And my question is, what kind of management do we have to do in order to keep that down where we can't afford to buy our own chipper or masticator and get it done?
Yeah, so a lot of those areas, you know, the tree thinning has been done. You're going to see, you know, in some areas where it's been opened up more, you may start to get grand fir and Douglas fir trees in particular growing back naturally, seeding in, just because those are the species that tend to vigorously naturally regenerate. Those trees will be much easier now to cut when they're small and to maintain that tree spacing of the canopy. Some of the thicker areas where you have a lot of that vegetation, a lot of the hardwood vegetation like the ocean spray and other shrub species, they're going to start to grow back. And so part of the agreements that we have with these projects is there's a maintenance period that the landowner takes responsibility for maintaining the work. And so the options with that are, if the ground is operable, you know, people will do it with a brush mower. Another option is to use herbicides, obviously use chemicals. A lot of landowners don't, you know, particularly like to do that, which I understand completely. So that is a challenge. Like I said, the masticator is not a perfect tool for doing this work because there is that maintenance, particularly on a site with more moisture like this, where you're going to have more regrowth in a shorter period of time. But even that mastication slash on the ground is a huge improvement over the potential fire behavior that you could get in there now. And so, you know, there's going to be some follow-up work that's going to be needed down the road in a few years. But like I said, it's going to be much, much less work than it is initially.
I don't think we can hear you, Brian. I don't want to cut you guys short for this. If you want to use the chat box, maybe we can answer your question there. It seems like the headphones aren't working. Technology is fun these days, right? I'll go ahead and share my screen while we get set up here. Okay. Okay. Well, Brian, I apologize for our technical disconnect here. I saw your lips moving, but we didn't hear anything. but we'll connect with you. So I'm Anna. Oh, great. Okay, so Anna Lale was supposed to talk today, but she unfortunately had a conflict come up last minute, so I'm filling in for her. From 2016 to 2019, I worked in the Kittitas County Conservation District. I helped facilitate and manage some of those grants and worked with a lot of private landowners in Kittitas County. Now my role has changed a little bit where I'm working on the coalition, so the Kittitas Fire Adapted Communities Coalition. So working with everyone from all sorts of scales. So I'm working at all different scales between the United States Forest Service level to the Washington DNR to local landowners, and kind of being this liaison between private property and public lands. And but my main focus for the Kittitas Fire Adapted Communities Coalition is providing resources that are applicable and help move or help private landowners address their concerns when it comes to wildfire. So one of the things that we have created is this map feed where landowners can utilize this to input, what type of work they've been doing, add pictures, that kind of thing. And this is a screenshot of that homepage. I'll also add it into the chat. But I feel like that's an important tool for just so you're not alone, right? There's a lot of landowners that have concerns, and in our area especially, and I think creating those connections and relationships are crucial for moving this type of work forward. So I know Anna is wanted to address all the FEMA grants that are going on, and if you thought some things with DNR can be confusing, well, FEMA is definitely a little confusing. However, we, back when I was working for KCCD, we had applied for a FEMA grant that was through, I believe it was Snag Canyon in 2014, which enabled us to apply for this grant. So it's been a long time coming. With this grant, it provides 75% cost share for landowners, private landowners, to do fuels reduction on their property. Of course, there are strings attached to it. So, the landowner has to contribute 25% or in kind, which means like your labor and materials count towards that match. But the areas on my screen, I don't know if I can annotate. How cool. So here's North Cle Elum Ridge. I just cut off a piece of it, and then South Cle Elum Ridge are the two areas that grant is property owners are eligible for. Now there are some caveats to that where they have certain strings required with that pot of money, right? So typically what we see is a 10 to 15-year maintenance agreement, similar to what Jason was talking about, and really emphasizing that it helps the landowners get that big push, that primary fuels reduction out of the way. So hopefully it's easier to maintain in the future. So that's one pot of money that's available right now. I think they're working on an extension, so it'll go into, I think, the end of next year. So fiscal year 2022 is when that grant is scheduled to end. And then, let's see if I can move my screen here. Come on, there we go. Kittitas County Fire District number 7 has a chipping program, which is a different pot of FEMA money, which complicates everything. However, it's a great tool too, and they have different constraints, so it can be extremely helpful to people who may not qualify or have used a service before from the KCCD and that FEMA pot of money or DNR pot of money to work with them and do chipping. I believe they're hiring a crew, so they will be implementing this summer. It's a seasonal thing, so I think it's only this summer that they can do this grant. So you can either contact Anna or Fire District 7 to talk about chipping. Unfortunately, it kind of runs into that same problem, John, that you mentioned, you know, like we chip the fuels, but after that, you know, you still have fuels on the ground. So chipping is very small fuels compared to mastication, but anyways, that problem still exists. Let's see here. And then we have DNR. So the program that Jason worked in, and his the district manager there, so Scott Chambers and Anna, have been putting together a mobile chipping event. It's similar strings attached to it that most of you guys are familiar with, where if you have used it in the past, it might limit your eligibility, that kind of thing. But if it's a different area of your property, so say you've utilized, you know, cost share or chipping for a specific portion in a quarter acre, and then you want to use it for the other side quarter acre or whatever that size may be, then this is the option. It's going to be in local neighborhoods, of course, neighborhoods are local. And usually Firewise communities will have a day scheduled or 2 days or whatever that may be for this roving chipper event. Usually what happens is they have a crew, you pilot, you stack it, they chip it, that kind of thing. So what I recommend is talking to Anna, and I'll provide all that information to you to utilize those resources. I think June, they're going to be very busy. So if you do have work that you're interested in, please reach out to them. And I did want to address eligibility a little bit just because it's quite a buzzkill sometimes, but they always require a 10 to 15 year maintenance agreement. And if you have done work prior, still talk to the conservation district. Sometimes it's a case-by-case basis, and depending on where you implemented work before and that kind of thing, we can figure out solutions to work and meet your objectives. Like I said, each grant, even though it says FEMA, it can be a little different than the other grant, the other FEMA grant, which is not confusing at all, right? But the thing consistent about FEMA is that it's a 10 to 15 year maintenance period. So the Kittitas Fire Adapted Communities Coalition really works hard to make better connections among the practitioners. So people like me, the implementers of the grant, so like Conservation District, Fire District 7, all those guys, and really improve our communication, not just between us, but also landowners too, to help create less confusion, although it's always a state of confusion. And also we bring to the table, you know, working together, more leverage, which means that we bring more money to the area in grants. And so we have more flexibility to do more work, increase pace and scale. So those projects like the Buffalo Springs project, that was a concept that, man, we talked about 2015 initially, you know. So unfortunately, these projects can be long-term relationships, right? So they take quite a while. But once we do get things lined up, it really does make an impact. And that Buffalo Springs project, we are telling that story quite often because it is pretty rare to see multiple landowners come together and make an impact across 57 acres is what Jason said. In another area, I know is about 20, 25 acres or somewhere in that ballpark. And that was, again, 5 or 6 landowners. So that is a unique characteristic of our county and how we've been working to move that needle across all lands. And also, I just want to acknowledge and appreciate your patience. I know we had some technical difficulties today. Also, you know, it's always a little bit confusing to work with so many different regulations, different land ownerships bring different objectives, different rules, And so we really work hard to find objectives that meet all the landowners' perspectives and also address their concerns, especially on private property. Because, you know, it shouldn't be a one-all end-all, right? You know, we should be able to enjoy our wildlife viewing, you know, on our property, as well as reduce, you know, our wildfire risk to our properties as well. So that is my spiel on Anna's behalf. Do we have any questions? Like I said, I can provide a lot more information after just linking you up to the right resources.
Well, I just want to add, Rose, that to our WFFA members, KFACC, Kittitas Fire Adapted Community Coalition, is where the action is with regard to making our community fire resilient. This is where the action is to make sure that we pass on a green forested landscape to the next generation versus gray or black. And you'll hear me say that many, many times over and again, but you know, if the KFACC meetings are monthly, you can go to the website or the Facebook page and find out. And even if you just go to sit in, this participation is critical to the success of creating a fire resilient community in the Upper Kittitas County. And I want to encourage all of our WFFA members to participate in KFACC. Thanks, Rose.
Thank you, Phil. And yes, I want to echo that really quick. When I say KFACC, it is open to any landowner, any stakeholder that's interested in Kittitas County or has a concern about Kittitas County. You know, sometimes we've talked about local county regulations that impact private landowners or public you know, local fire departments. So we use it, it is really used as a platform to filter among all scales and all problems and how that affects the people on the ground or the land on the ground. So yeah, I know FireWise and fire adapted communities, that terminology can be really difficult because it's passed around so much. And FireWise is a recognition program nationally pushed by the NFPA. There's some grant funding and things like that that are utilized. Like State Farm has their $500 every wildfire preparedness day, which is today. But fire adapted communities is really kind of an organic concept where we take the problems and issues that apply to us locally. So, so they, you know, it can be a public lands issue that we're talking about, or it can be a private property issue, you know, burning in the urban growth area. That's been talked about at the local level in the coalition structure. And actually change has been made based on, you know, people's involvement, like private landowners who take it to the state and say, we need to address that. So I just want to make sure that I express that it really does, it's a grassroots movement. And, you know, using the word grassroots is kind of funny, but it's really locally led and locally driven, and don't discount the actions that or the impact that a local private landowner can make, because it does make waves across the state. So I ran a little bit over. I'll start my share. Actually, I think it's Eric Coney next on the agenda. Is that right?
I think so. Am I up, Phil?
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so go ahead and share your screen and you should be.
All right. Which one do you guys see in there?
Your presentation mode.
Oh, darn it. All right. Let's see to try to do this one. Stop share. We'll just do screen one. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I did it again. Are we there? Wrong one still? Oh boy.
Wrong one.
Let's see. Use presenter view from beginning. Oh man. Let's see. Boy, I thought I had this down.
Well, it's like a Zoom test for us all, so we're all in
Yeah.
the same boat today.
Let's just try this, and then we'll go Zoom meeting, share screen. Beginning. All right, let's try that. Is that better now or no?
Yes, you're good.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. So, well, that was fun. My name is Eric Koenig with American Forest Management. I got asked by Phil to do a little presentation on a recent project we just did for the Clarks out on Markovich in South Cle Elum Road. And I just kind of put together a brief little thing. So are we still good? You guys seen the beginning steps, slideshow, all that stuff? Thumbs up.
We're all good.
Okay,
You're good, Eric. Go.
All right. So basically what we ended up doing for the Clarks is they contacted me to do a pretty large project on there. It's about 34, 35 acres, of which was operable. We had 29. I first started talking with the Clarks. We did a couple email conversations with them, phone conversations, reviewed their management plan, all that kind of stuff. Wanted to make sure I knew what kind of goals they had. The main ones that I got from it was they wanted to make sure their forest was, healthy and resilient to bugs, insects, fire, all that kind of stuff moving down the road. They wanted to reduce their fire risk on site and maintain or improve the wildlife habitat for the elk and turkeys and all the other little critters that run around out there. So before we actually signed a contract with them, I went out and did a site visit with Robert and Shirley and walked around with Dennis, actually once we were painting trees, just to really get a sense of what we were doing on the ground and make sure what we were discussing, on the phone and in emails was actually being, communicated and implemented on the ground. There can be a big difference sometimes between, how that can work out. So we wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page with that. The next step was we got a harvest permit for them. We started out with, there was one non-fish perennial stream on there and some potentially unstable features, some maybe inner gorge, but we just buffered those out and we were good to go. So that was kind of leading up to everything, just basic, starting, I guess, basic steps to start a harvest. Next steps was we contracted with a local logger that I use quite a bit for my harvest. He's out of Ellensburg and he's done work for me from Easton all the way up to Wenatchee. So he was pretty happy to be working close to home for a little bit. So anyway, next steps was we did some log marketing and used our local markets that we had. The Clarks had a pretty nice stand of timber that we were able to make some nice logs out of, and we got some good market timing, so that worked out well. We also planned the harvest for winter. It was a little warmer and wetter than what we would have liked. But overall, it turned out quite good. This was a picture of about the first week of logging, and then we were shut down for about 3 weeks because it got warm and rained on us for a while. So it's nice having contractors that know and appreciate the private land that they're working on, and they know when to shut things down and they know when they can go to work at the same time. So this was a nice load of export logs that we cut going off the property. Really nice wood and pretty short haul to the export yard just in the Cle Elum. So that worked out really well. And then this is just a little time lapse I took of the feller bunch that we had working out there. We did some scattered cut tree markings so the Clarks wouldn't have to look at a bunch of the, paint bands on the property left over. We probably marked 6 to 7 acres of the 29 acres that we harvested. And this is just a pretty cool little demonstration of what the buncher can do. So anyway, you see them cutting away a lot of the smaller trees, a lot of the mistletoe. See a lot more of the light coming in. It's a pretty cool little demonstration of what we're doing out there. And then my dog makes an appearance. So anyway, that's just kind of a brief little video that I think is fun to see. Okay, and then so slash disposal, we actually used Jason's program and got some DNR 50% cost share work to do PCT and basically all the non-commercial work following up the commercial harvest. We got a burn permit from DNR and burned the slash as we logged it, so there was no big slash piles left over at all. Now it's all gone. And this is a nice picture from Robert of the 2 machines that we had working. So we even had to fight the moisture and the soil on getting the mastication done. We actually just wrapped up everything about a week or 10 days ago, something like that. So we just got it done. So the important parts are the before pictures. Everybody likes the pictures here. I was negligent and forgot to get a picture of this upper area before we logged it, but this is a big Wolfie Legacy Doug fir. There's a blue 1 written on it right here. This is another photo picture. There's a 3, and then there's a harvest boundary ribbon for kind of reference. So you can just see there's a whole bunch of mistletoe in here, lots of ocean spray, pretty heavy brush. Didn't even see the hornet's nest till now. So there's another one, but let's see. So some more before pictures, pretty relatively spaced overstory trees, heavy brush, Oregon grape, ocean spray, 9 bark, snowberry, vine maple in this one. Pretty overstocked for some of the smaller material as well. So this kind of just what we were dealing with before. And some more before pictures, just kind of showing you guys what's there. So, and now this is what it looks like after. We just took these about a week ago, thinned it pretty well, but left probably 25 to 40 mature overstory trees per acre. The logging and mastication, like I said, just got wrapped up about a week and a half ago or so, and it's already just gorgeous in there with all the green and grasses popping back up again. We'll do some direct comparisons, but here's that number 3 from before. I mean, you just compare these to what we were dealing with, and it's a big difference. This is the RMZ, so that's why it's a lot thicker, but you can actually look through to the other side of the harvest unit and get a good sense of the difference between the different stand conditions right next to each other. And the most important ones, I think, are these ones for the comparison. Here's that number 3, and here's that same tree again. And then here's our harvest boundary, and here's that same ribbon. So that's pretty stark for showing, kind of what we did, how the mastication ended up. Left some brush here and there, hit a lot of the mistletoe out of the took a lot of the mistletoe out, made sure we were retaining our big, healthy, overstory, clean Doug firs. Did a couple of, here's actually a good illustration of a short snag that we created. You can see it right here in this picture. And we just cut that off at about 12 feet up to leave for some, future bird habitat in the future, and not have another longbutt sitting in the slash pile. So that's a pretty good one. here's that tree number 4 is right here. And then you can see it right down below as well. I mean, it's pretty impressive looking, the direct side-by-side comparison of how it turned out. And then this, I think, is the best. Here, this is our tree number 7. This is on the east side of their property. There was just this big thicket, and our contractor went through and we took some chip and saw out of there, and then mulched up a lot of the, suppressed low live crown ratios, left a little thicket for the future, and then ground up a lot of this brush, and we're already getting some grasses to come back in. So overall, I am thrilled with it. I think the Clarks are too. I think I got the thumbs up from Phil if he asked me to do a little presentation out here as well. So it, all in all, it turned out a pretty good project. Kind of a summary for it. This turned out to be a really nice project because the Clarks had very clear expectations of what their objectives were and what they expected. So that allowed me to make sure I knew, what we were doing for them on the site. They trusted me to get the work done for them and not have to micromanage things. So that worked out well. Me having local knowledge of the contractors that I trusted to do the job, who, like I said, know how to respect private land. They know kind of the local seasonality, weather conditions, all of which are really important on, working on private tree farms like this. Us knowing, like I just said, local seasons, markets. So taking advantage of log and lumber prices and timing and all that good stuff. And DNR cost sharing opportunities also allowed us to get this work done as well. And and this is 3-ish miles from that big Buffalo Springs project that Jason was just talking about. So it's pretty close proximity. And lastly, I think we got a pretty good end result here. We got some happy clients, healthy forests, some better wildlife habitat, and reduced fire risk. And Robert sent me this picture about a week ago. He said that they've been in, that they've had this farm for quite a while, and they haven't seen, this many elk for pretty much ever. And they were walking through their property about a week ago and hung out for quite a while. So that's pretty fun when you see the project result, have that good of a result pretty quickly and have a bunch of happy critters and some happy clients. So that's what I had. Brief run through of the last year out on the Clark property, and see if I can figure out how to end this thing. Maybe
I can do it for you.
Great.
Any questions for Eric since we got him here?
There's one question from Betsy. That's Betsy Monahan. Eric, she's asking about the log prices, log market, and she's got the domestic in there mixed up with export, but can you address that?
Sure. So yeah, unfortunately, so log prices have gone up. They have not gone up at nearly the rate of lumber prices, though. They are not the same market. I think lumber's gone up 200 or 300%, and log prices have gone up 20 to 25. So there's still a very high supply of lumber coming into domestic mills. So the mills don't have a reason to raise their price because they're getting a whole bunch of wood at what they're paying already. So their margins are going up without having to pay more for the logs. So
Betsy has got some logs that would qualify for the export market. What's the export market look like then at Bullfrog, Eric?
Export markets are trending up. China and Korea both are starting to buy more logs, and I know Japan logs, going all the way down to Olympia, are really in demand right now as well. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And if anything, increased export prices is going to help our domestic log prices as well. Because if folks are going to shift more wood towards the export, then the domestic mills are going to get some less logs and hopefully have to pay a little bit more to help compete with that. So that's kind of the rundown, and everything could literally change on Monday. But that's the reality of what we're dealing with. And
Thanks, Eric. That's a good answer. Very good answer. Thank you.
okay.
Any more questions? I just want to mention that Robert and Shirley Clark are longtime WFFA members. In fact, some of the earliest members of our chapter, which has been going now for about 26 years. I just did the math on that. I know that because I've been president almost that long. Never mind. I also want to mention that the Clarks have agreed to host our fall meeting. We're going to have an actual in-person fall meeting this year. And Eric, we want you there. It'll be one of the Saturdays in September. So leave your Saturdays in September open if you can. If you can give us some input on whether or not that's even doable for you, we might be able to change it. But keep that in mind for now.
I'll look at what the elk seasons are, Phil, and I'll let you know. How's that?
Okay. Okay, Rose. Where are we at?
We're just about the end. One thing before I turn it over to Phil for the Loping Lane, I just wanted to add, I don't have enough things to do. I'm doing my PhD in wildfire management, natural resources, and society, which means that I'll be going around the neighborhood this summer trying to have you guys fill out surveys. So just don't be surprised if you see a University of Idaho person walking around trying to talk to you guys about wildfire and what you guys care about on your private land. So just to pre-warn you in the summer. Okay, I will share Phil's screen here, or share my screen for Phil.
Okay.
And we'll do our last agenda item.
Okay. Okay. Well, I just wanted to say that, I was really apprehensive about doing any of our WFFA meetings on Zoom, but this has worked out really well. My apprehension has gone away, and I don't know if you noticed or not, but at one time we had as many as 22 in attendance, and that's about as good as we can get on an in-person meeting. And part of the reason for that is, for those of you that don't know, is that most of our membership, or at least half of it, lives on the west side. So this spring meeting is kind of hard to get people over the pass sometimes for an in-person meeting. So I think Zoom has actually turned out to be a positive thing for us. And I want to acknowledge and thank Patty for doing a fantastic job of getting the word out on to our membership on this event, which has been really, really successful, I think. And so
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just wanted to share what I want to first or next welcome our new members. Our new members are the Hermanson Timber and Land Company. They're off the Wheel Road, which is on the east end of Cle Elum Ridge. Ryan Mansfield is a new member. Chris Martin from Roslyn is a new member. And Derek and Kristen Schatz are new members. They're in the Hidden Valley area. And Rachel Mickey from the DNR has also joined our club. So we thank you for becoming part of our group. And we seem to hang in there right around 70 members. We lose some and we gain some every year. This year, when we gained acres. We went from about 5,800 acres to a little over 6,000 acres, as I said earlier. And nearly all of that, or I'll say all of it, is in the Upper County. And as I said earlier, that our membership represents about 200 individuals. So we are the go-to organizations for family forest owners in Kittitas County. And you don't have to be a landowner to be a member. I am no longer a landowner. We got out of that. That's another story. Anyway, this is before and after is recently completed. This is one of Jason and DNR project. This is on one of our new members' property. Again, on the east end of Cleella Ridge, off the Wheel Road. And on the left there, you see the before and then the after on the right. So we've gone from 300 to 400 trees per acre on the left to 50 to 100 trees per acre on the right. And so this is a pine stand. This is just the entirely opposite type of stand conditions that we saw on South Cleella Ridge a few minutes ago from Jason. So this is heavy to pine. There's a lot of mistletoe and a lot fewer site resources to support trees. So the trees here for the long term have to be down around certainly under 100 trees per acre and more like 50 trees per acre to be sustainable long term. So what you see on the right there is the mechanical treatment, which was mastication, and it is now set up for prescribed fire. And Kara did a great job about talking about how we need to reintroduce fire to our forested landscapes and how it's a goal to include small forest landowners in that in that concept. And I can see a lot of people squirming in their chair when we talk about fire on their property. You know, and I've got to say that it's going to be a rare circumstance where we're able to include family forest owners in prescribed fire. It's you know, the ownerships are just too small unless we got a whole group of them together. Rose, I don't think it's going to be feasible. Now, it could happen. It could happen, but like it is up behind Roslyn right now, you know, prescribed fire is working good, but we only have 2 or 3 small forest landowners and TNC involved in those, and the Roslyn Urban Forest involved in that in that prescribed fire that's going on up behind Roslyn. So anyway, we can remain optimistic. It's a goal. We have to reintroduce fire to the landscape if we're going to maintain forest health in the long term. And I say we have to. We don't have to do it on every acre, but ideally we have to get a lot more prescribed fire going than we have now. And so what you see on the right there is just right for it. And how long will that last? This will last a lot longer than what you saw, what Jason showed you. This treatment right here is probably good for at least 10 to 15 years before we have to re-enter mechanically. Ideally, if we can use prescribed fire, we could eliminate mechanical treatment and introduce prescribed fire within 5 years. That would be ideal. If we go 10 years, we might end up with too long a flame length. I mean, the shrub layer is going to recover by that time and get too long a flame length. The trees, this is pine, of course, ponderosa pine, and they've been pruned. You can see that the ladder fuels have been pruned, and all the cut material has been masticated. Okay. Any comments or questions? I think we've wrapped it up, Rose.
Sure. I do have one comment about the work that y'all have been doing, especially on Markovich and, you know, Buffalo Springs, and then also Loping Lane. You know, the DNR has put in an effort to identify some areas that they could hopefully suppress wildfires successfully. And those areas, there are some lines that they've established that perhaps under the right conditions that fire can be engaged with successfully. And so that there's a lot of multiple benefits to what they've been doing, especially in the areas that these private landowners have worked together. So not only from the forest resiliency aspect, but also from a wildfire suppression point of view as well. So there's all sorts of variables and benefits that make these projects really great. But having said that, you know, any work that private landowners do are going to help in engaging in future conditions and suppression. So anyways, I don't want to take too much time, but there's a lot of different scales, a lot of different, you know, efforts and everything, and making those connections between all of them can be difficult, but also very, you know, just a good thing to do. Yeah, so I could talk for hours in circles about this, so I will spare you guys. So anybody have lasting comments, questions? We can leave this meeting open if people want to use the forum and chat, or you guys can go and enjoy your windy Eastern Washington, Central Washington Saturday. It's up to you.
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment, not dragging on too much, but yeah, like Rose just said, just for everyone's information, that North Clay Elm Ridge, we have a fuel break along that entire ridge, all the way out to Roslyn, essentially, from the Wheel Road at the entrance to the Tiana Way. And it's across state land, private land, and Nature Conservancy managed land. So that's a real big success story in our book. And it's just due to the collaboration among everybody working on those projects. And the Buffalo Springs area too, with the Clark's property, that's huge to see all these different people working together to get so much done in a specific area. So I think these are just really awesome examples of how we can be successful doing this work.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thanks.
Yes,
Hi, Robert.
I'd like to thank you and Patty for all the work you have done with the county, and particularly Eric for doing a fantastic job on our property. It's totally different than what I would have ever expected, and we just love it now. And we want to have everybody come this fall if they can. So thank you all, including Rose, for putting this nice program together. Have a great day.
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Robert. Anybody else? Well, it's good to see you all again, Robert and Shirley, and look forward to meeting your son Dennis this fall. And good to see you, Betsy. Hi, Betsy. I don't know if Betsy's still there. Betsy Monahan was on the on the call. Betsy is well, Bob Monahan was the founding member of this chapter. Bob Monahan, Harry Masterson, and Ralph Charlton founded this chapter, this WFFA chapter, in 1994. Little bit of WFFA trivia there for you. You get that down?
I just would.
And Patty's taken Patty's our secretary treasurer. That means she takes notes, right, Patty?
Yeah, right. I just want to thank all our members that have been able to join in, and just want to thank the Clarks and all the speakers for, and in particular Rose, for putting this together. It's great information. Thank you.
Hey, Rose.
Yeah.
Anytime. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Rose, did you say this is going to, this whole program can be on YouTube? Is that correct?
Yeah. So I've been recording and I will post it to YouTube. So feel free to share with all your friends and relatives and whoever else you can reach.
Great.
And I'll be sending out the info that Rose provides as to where on YouTube.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, see, that's something we couldn't do before. And so this situation has actually opened up a new venue for us to get together. And I'm not, you know, I'm in there. I like it. Don't you, John? Thanks.
I'm happy we got Phil on board. It took a little coaxing to get him to commit to Zoom.
Yeah.
I want to thank Patty for helping to set this up. And one of the most important resources in managing the forest is the human resource. And that includes people like Patty and Phil and others. And right now, as far as our part of this, we're at that stage where we're having to hand it off to the next generation. And my daughter will be living in the woods with us this summer. So I hope to contact many of you, introduce her and turn her to the light side of things.
Great.
That's great, John.
Great, John. Thank you.
Well, I think if there's nothing else, we'll
Yeah,
say-
I'm gonna stop